black waitress at a luxury restaurant picks up a phone call meant for someone else and answers in perfect Chinese. Within days, she's framed for leaking data watched by hidden cameras and accused of betraying the very millionaire who gave her a shot. But they didn't count on her fighting back. This time, silence won't save anyone. Where are you watching from, and is it morning, afternoon, or night where you are? Under the amber lights of Belmore's top-floor dining lounge, everything moved with a quiet elegance. Tables were spaced far enough to ensure the privacy of whispered deals. The clink of glasses, the low hum of conversation, the crisp linen and polished flatware, all part of the unspoken ritual that came with money and old names. Vivian Jones had worked there for over 2 years. She was good at staying in the background. Being overlooked wasn't new to her. It was a skill, in fact, learned young, practiced daily. Her uniform was spotless posture, upright steps calculated to be silent. If her presence registered at all, it was as part of the scenery, polite, invisible, efficient. That night started like most. The Wednesday crowd leaned corporate finance attorneys, consultants, startup founders with their too loud laughter. Vivian carried plates with her usual grace, answering with, "Yes, sir," and "right away," when needed, always with a neutral smile. Around 8, a private table in the far corner was seated 4 men. 1 woman, all Chinese, all dressed impeccably. Their body language was tight, their English strained. Tension radiated off them in low pulses. They ordered sparingly too, preoccupied to focus on the menu. Vivian noted the unease, but said nothing. She'd seen this type before, business deals too big to fail or too dirty to name. 15 minutes into their meal, a phone rang. Not loudly, but urgently. The man at the head of the table, mid-50s, sharp eyes gray at the temples, took the call and began speaking in Mandarin. His tone turned fast-clipped, then agitated. The others tried to follow, but whatever he was hearing didn't sit well. Then he stood, turned toward the others, and raised his voice, still in Mandarin. No one in the dining room understood a word. No one except Vivian. She had paused near the sideboard, stacking dessert menus. Her hand stopped moving. Her chest tightened, but she kept her face still. What he was saying wasn't just urgent, it was dangerous. Something about a wire transfer, a change in agreement, someone named Shi going back on his word. The table erupted into confused whispers. The woman said something in broken English, asking what was happening. The man ignored her pacing now. The room grew quieter. Other diners looked over. Vivian inhaled slowly, then took 2 steps forward. "Excuse me," she said, calmly switching to Mandarin with a careful, respectful tone. "If you would like, I can help translate. I understand you may be discussing a financial matter." They froze. The man looked her up and down. "You speak Mandarin?" "Yes," Vivian replied, still even, "and Cantonese if needed." The woman nodded rapidly, almost relieved. "Please, he says there's a delay, something with the New York firm. We don't know what it means." Vivian listened again as the man began speaking to her directly, slower now. She translated each sentence carefully, using financial terms that weren't from a textbook, but from use from having listened to enough late-night investment podcasts while washing dishes, from auditing her own night classes with borrowed IDs from a mind that refused to accept "not your place" as an answer. It took 3 minutes. She translated the entire exchange without bias or interruption, and when she finished, she stepped back quietly and waited. The man's gaze lingered on her. He said nothing. Then he nodded once, pulled out his phone, and made another call. The others returned to eating. Vivian turned to leave, but from across the room, someone was watching her. Edric Lewis hadn't spoken a word since he entered the lounge, nor had he touched his plate. He sat alone, a glass of water in front of him, his suit impeccable, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. He had arrived unannounced, the host barely catching his name, before ushering him to his usual booth. No assistant, no entourage, just him. And now he was watching Vivian like a man who had just seen a ghost. Vivian returned to the bar area. She could feel the heat in her cheeks, though her expression stayed composed. Her manager Thomas approached with his familiar tight smile, the kind that stretched too far across his thin face. "Vivian," he said in a low voice, "I know that was helpful, but you need to understand. This isn't a tech startup. It's Belmore. Guests don't come here to be corrected or surprised. You can't jump in like that. Keep it professional." "I was helping," she replied softly. "I'm sure you were," he said, already walking away. "Let's keep surprises to a minimum." Yeah, back at her station, she wiped the counter slow and deliberate. Her fingers trembled slightly. She hated that. It wasn't fear. It was restraint. When the check came for the table she'd helped, they left without a word, but with a noticeably larger tip than expected. Still not a glance in her direction. As the night wound down and the guests began to thin, she collected silverware trays, folded napkins, and made herself small again. She didn't see him approach. Edric's voice came first. "Miss Jones." She looked up. His voice was calm, measured, but not cold. "I'm Edric Lewis." He extended a simple white business card. The name was embossed clean, no title needed. Vivian wiped her hand discreetly before taking it. She looked down at the card. "I saw what you did earlier," Edric said, "and I heard how you did it. You weren't showing off. You were solving a problem with precision and respect. That's not common." She didn't know what to say. "Thank you felt too small." "I'm sorry, felt wrong." He didn't wait for her to answer. "I need someone with your skills. Discretion, language, intelligence. I don't care about resumes. If you're free tomorrow morning at 9, come to Lewis Global. We'll talk. Bring nothing but yourself." He gave her a small nod, then walked away. She stared at the card. Her fingers curled around it, feeling the weight, the fine print. The name meant power, but also danger. Everyone knew the Lewis family financial titans owners of half the skyline, and yet this wasn't an invitation. It was a test. Vivian stood alone at the service station, card in hand, thoughts already racing. Her shift ended in 20 minutes. She had laundry to do, dinner to skip, and rent due in 5 days. But something had shifted. Someone had seen her. Really seen her. And that was new. The next morning arrived colder than expected. The early light slipped across downtown glass towers like a warning rather than a welcome. Vivian stood outside the Lewis Global building, clutching the strap of her bag, her breath curling in small puffs in front of her. She had pressed her shirt the night before, polished her shoes until the leather gleamed, and tied her curls back into a neat bun. Still standing at the foot of the 70-story building, she felt like a fraud. It wasn't nerves exactly. It was the weight of walking into a place that was never built for her. The sliding glass doors parted automatically as she approached, and she stepped into a marble lobby so clean it looked untouched by time. Inside, the air smelled like eucalyptus and polished stone. The people moved differently here, confident, brisk speaking in a language of glances and clipped phrases she hadn't learned. She walked toward the reception desk, heart steady, but chest tight. A woman in a tailored navy blazer looked up without smiling. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Vivian said calmly. "I have an appointment with Mr. Edric Lewis." There was a pause. The receptionist blinked once, then tapped rapidly on her keyboard. Her eyes flicked to Vivian's outfit, neat, but not designer, clean, but not expensive. Her lips thinned. "A name." "Vivian Jones." Another pause. More typing. Then a furrowed brow. "I don't see anything scheduled under that name. Did someone call to confirm your meeting?" Vivian hesitated, then nodded. "Mr. Lewis gave me his card last night. He told me to come here at 9. Before the woman could reply, a uniformed security guard stepped closer, his posture already in defensive mode. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone firm, bordering on patronizing. "No," the receptionist said, but she didn't wave him off. She kept her gaze fixed on Vivian. "We're just clarifying." The guard looked at Vivian like he was trying to place her in a category. "Are you here with catering, housekeeping? Those teams check in through the service entrance." Vivian felt her fingers twitch around her bag strap. She wanted to speak, to correct him, but she swallowed the impulse. The elevator dinged softly across the lobby. Heads turned as Edric Lewis stepped out alone again, suit perfectly pressed, movements unhurried. His eyes scanned the lobby, then landed on her. Without breaking stride, he walked straight to the front desk. "She's with me," he said, his voice calm but not quiet. The guard stepped back half a step, startled. The receptionist stiffened. "Mr. Lewis, I didn't see her name on—" "It was a verbal invite," Edric replied, not unkindly. He turned to Vivian, gesturing toward the elevator. "Let's go." Vivian followed him without looking back. Inside the elevator, he said nothing at first. They rose in silence, the floor numbers blinking by. When they reached 28, he finally spoke. "I hope that wasn't too uncomfortable." "It was expected," Vivian said simply. He looked over. Not surprised, not amused, just thoughtful. "It shouldn't be?" The floor opened into a spacious office level with floor-to-ceiling glass. The view was dizzying bridges, river skyline, all framed by sleek furniture and expensive art. Edric led her down a hallway lined with closed doors, stopping at a corner conference room. "Have a seat," he said. The table was long and empty except for a tablet and a thick folder. He slid both toward her. This is a translated contract from our Beijing team. Our usual liaison is on leave. I'd like to see how well you understand the language, and more importantly, the tone." Vivian sat carefully opening the folder first. She scanned the Chinese pages for a full minute, her eyes narrowing slightly as she picked up on syntax and phrasing. Her lips moved silently as she processed. Then she looked at the English version on the tablet. There were errors, nothing catastrophic, but plenty of phrases that lost nuance. She pointed one out. "Here," she said. "This part doesn't mean the funds are guaranteed. It says they are intended to be available, which is softer. Implies room for withdrawal. That could change how your team interprets the risk." Edric leaned on the table with one arm nodding slowly. "How do you know that?" Vivian didn't flinch. "Because that's how they say no without saying no." He smiled slightly, not in amusement, but in appreciation. "That's very good." She nodded once. "Anything else you want me to look at?" "Not today," Edric said. "You've done more than enough for a first meeting." Vivian stood. The conversation felt concluded, but as she gathered her things, Edric spoke again. "You studied Mandarin where—" She paused, then answered truthfully. "My mother. Some community classes. A lot of practice." "You're not just self-taught," he said, more observation than compliment. "You listen differently. You read the space around the words." Vivian wasn't sure how to respond to that. She didn't need praise. She needed clarity. "Is this a job offer?" Edric raised an eyebrow. "Not yet, but I want you to come back tomorrow. There's more to see, more to decide." She nodded once. "All right." On the way out, she passed by a glass-walled office where a man in a charcoal suit stood watching. He didn't speak, but his eyes lingered, cold, calculating. He didn't introduce himself, but she'd learn his name soon enough, Donald Greaves, chief financial officer, and he'd already marked her presence as an anomaly. Outside, the city felt sharper, louder, less contained. Vivian walked toward the subway, her mind racing, but her steps steady. She had just stepped into a world that didn't expect her, didn't welcome her, and might very well try to push her back out. But she'd made it past the front desk. That was more than most. By the end of her second week, Vivian had settled into a rhythm at Lewis Global that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. Each morning she arrived just before the glass doors opened to the public. Her ID badge tucked carefully into her blazer pocket, her appearance precise, neutral, unassuming. Her tasks were varied, but controlled language support for Asia-facing investments, quiet translation of internal memos organizing and auditing international contract trails. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her access, pages and pages of numbers, names, signatures, all structured to look clean on the surface. She learned quickly to observe more than she spoke, to ask questions only when it served a purpose. No one asked how she had learned Mandarin, and no one tried to guess. Most passed her in the hallway with polite nods or distracted glances. Edric rarely spoke unless he needed her input, and Donald Greaves never acknowledged her existence, which in a place like this was its own kind of attention. The file box was heavier than it looked, but Vivian carried it without asking for help. The assistant who handed it to her gave no instructions beyond a dismissive glance and a shrug. "Old investment review files. Just flag anything marked Beijing Holdings or Juno Partners," he had muttered before disappearing down the hallway. She took the box into one of the smaller archive rooms, a windowless space tucked into the northeast corner of the floor, lined with gray metal shelves and that distinct scent of dry paper and stale toner. A single desk lamp hummed above her as she sat down and began thumbing through folders, her eyes trained to scan for logos, dates, and keywords. It had become routine, tedious, yes, but oddly calming in its structure. She could disappear into it, unnoticed, unjudged. That was until her eyes stopped on a name. The label on the folder was Ordinary Tan Manila, slightly creased at the corners, one printed line across the front in faded blue ink. But the name on that line made her blood pull tight in her veins. Veronica Jones. She blinked, leaned in, and read it again. Underneath the name, in smaller type, Former Chief Accounting Officer, Internal Misappropriation Inquiry. Closed. Her fingers froze on the edge of the folder. Her throat dried so quickly it hurt to swallow. It wasn't a coincidence. That wasn't just any name. That was her mother. Her mother who had scrubbed other people's floors. Her mother who once told her stone-faced and without explanation that she should never trust men who wore watches that cost more than rent. Her mother who never not once mentioned ever working at Lewis Global. And now here she was, on a folder, labeled and shelved like something no longer alive. Vivian didn't open it. Not there. not with cameras watching or steps echoing past the door. She made a note of the file number, the box ID, and returned everything just as she had found it. Her hands moved with a quiet efficiency that belied the storm inside her chest. That evening, she skipped the train and walked 20 blocks across the city, her feet moving faster than her thoughts. She needed air. She needed answers. She needed her mother. The apartment in West Point looked the same. Bricks stained from decades of weather, narrow stairwell, lined with chipped paint, the scent of frying oil drifting through cracked hallway doors. Vivian knocked once, then used her key. Inside, the space was warm, cluttered alive, in the way only long-lived places are. Veronica stood at the stove, one hand on a pan jazz playing low from the radio on the windowsill. She turned just slightly. "You're early," she said. "You hungry?" Vivian didn't answer. She set her bag down and placed a single printed page on the kitchen table. Veronica didn't look at it right away. She flipped the burner off, set the pan aside, wiped her hands on the towel by the sink. Then she approached and glanced down. For a moment she was still. Then she pulled out a chair and sat. "You weren't supposed to find that," she said. Vivian sat across from her, her voice steady but strained. "You didn't tell me you worked there, at Lewis." Veronica didn't blink. Because it didn't matter anymore. "They said you were the chief accounting officer, that you were accused of embezzling $30 million. That's not nothing." Veronica let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting years to escape. Her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I didn't steal anything, Vivian. I signed documents I shouldn't have signed. I trusted the wrong people. When the floor dropped out, someone had to be blamed. It was never going to be the people with the last names on the building." Vivian wanted to believe her. She needed to. But the part of her that had grown up watching her mother swallow her pride and anger year after year couldn't let it go that easily. "So they framed you?" "They isolated me. They buried the audit, then pulled me into a room and told me I could either resign quietly or watch them drag my name through the press until I had nothing left but court dates. I had you to think about. I wasn't going to survive that and keep you safe. So I left. I disappeared." "You cleaned floors," Vivian said softer now. "You cleaned floors after managing millions." "I did what I had to do," Veronica said. Her voice didn't shake. "What would you have preferred, that I spent your childhood in prison so I could prove a point?" Vivian felt something shift in her ribs. Not resentment, not pity, something older than that. Grief, maybe, for all the versions of her mother she'd never been allowed to see. "Why didn't you ever tell me the truth?" Veronica looked at her for a long time. Her eyes weren't sharp, weren't wounded. They were tired. "Because you didn't need the burden. You had enough working against you. If you knew what they took from me, you'd go chasing after ghosts. And ghosts don't care if you bleed." Vivian reached for the paper again, but Veronica's hand landed on hers. It wasn't rough. It was anchoring. "Don't go any deeper, baby. That place, those people, they're not going to let you pull back once you see too much. And they don't care who gets buried to keep their foundation clean." Vivian pulled her hand back, stood. Her breath came a little harder now. "I can't unsee it, Mom. I'm already in." Veronica didn't argue. She just sat there listening to the jazz murmur from the window. As Vivian walked to the door, Veronica called out one more time. "You have your father's eyes." Vivian paused, her hand on the knob. "You told me he died." "He did, in a way." "What's that supposed to mean?" Veronica's voice was quiet now. "He didn't survive that world either." Vivian left without another word. The hallway felt colder now, the steps steeper. The past had cracked open like a fault line, and she had no idea how far down it went. But she knew this much: it started with Veronica, and it wasn't finished yet. Coming right off the edge of that conversation with her mother, Vivian hadn't really slept. The next 2 days passed in a haze of translated contracts, silent elevator rides, and the occasional forced nod from upper-floor assistants who still hadn't learned her name. She functioned well enough on the surface, reviewing Mandarin phrasing for another offshore partnership proposal, filtering out vague diplomatic language that could turn legally hazardous, but internally she was fraying. Her mother's voice kept playing on a loop. "He didn't survive that world either." That line lingered in the back of her skull like a song she couldn't shake. The weight of it was strange. Not exactly grief, not yet. More like a key being handed to a door she had never dared to open. On the third morning, something odd arrived in the mailroom. A narrow envelope with no return address, her name typed in small, neat caps. No stamp, no barcode, as if it had been placed there by hand. She stood by the copy machine envelope, unopened thumb brushing over the texture of the paper. The smell of toner mixed with that faint dustiness only old paper carried. When she opened it, the handwriting startled her angled, sharp familiar in a way that pulled at the back of her mind. Inside was a single sentence. "Come to Greenstone Park, Sunday, sunrise, by the chess tables." Folded beneath it was a photo. She recognized the apartment wallpaper immediately, the faded blue flower pattern her mother had never replaced. The photo was decades old. In it, a woman who looked like Veronica, younger, unsmiling, cradled a baby swaddled in yellow. And beside her stood a man of East Asian descent, slightly taller than Veronica, with one hand lightly on her shoulder, the other touching the baby's head. The man had the same deep-set eyes Vivian saw in her mirror. Her fingers trembled just slightly as she turned the photo over. On the back, New Year's Day, 1992, VY and our girl. Sunday came before she was ready. She wore simple clothes, jeans, dark coat scarf pulled up high. The sky over Greenstone Park was still tinted lavender when she arrived, the grass glistening with dew. At the far end, by the concrete chess tables, no one really used a man was already waiting. He wore a beige coat, sat with his back to her hands, folded on the table. When she approached, he didn't turn right away. "You came," he said. His voice was low measured. His accent was subtle American cadence with just the faintest rhythm of Chinese in the vowels. Vivian stood a few feet away, studying the back of his head. "You sent the photo." He turned slowly. His face was older than in the photo, of course. Lines carved around his eyes. Hair gone mostly gray. But there it was, the bone structure, the quiet stillness. Something about the way he looked at her made her stomach knot. My name is Yishen Mo," he said. "And yes, I sent it." She didn't sit. "You said you died." "That's what my mother told me." He nodded once. "For all practical purposes, I did." "That doesn't make any sense." "It will, if you let me explain." She looked around. The park was empty except for a jogger in the distance. The street beyond was quiet, too early for most people to be out. She finally lowered herself onto the bench across from him, arms still crossed. "I was an internal audit consultant, hired to investigate Lewis Global's East Asia transactions. This was back when your mother was chief accounting officer. She didn't know me, not at first. I wasn't allowed to tell her why I was there." "So you spied on her?" "At first. But she wasn't the problem. She was the only one asking the right questions. That's why they decided she was a liability." He paused, letting that sink in. Vivian said nothing. "Veronica and I, we got close. Not in some scandalous way, but real. We shared too many late nights reviewing balance sheets that didn't add up. We saw it happening from two sides. She inside me from outside. When we figured out what they were trying to hide, illicit capital funneled through shell partnerships in Macau accounts traced to board family names, we made the mistake of confronting it." He looked down at his hands. They were still, steady. "I was threatened. She was offered a deal, take the blame, or they go after her family. That meant you. She agreed to fall. I tried to protect her. That's when I disappeared." Vivian's throat was tight. She hadn't even realized she was holding her breath. "You left her. You left us." "I know. I didn't know how to stay and keep you safe." She looked away, blinking hard. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of wet leaves. It was too much, too fast. But some part of her believed him. The quiet certainty in his voice wasn't practiced. It wasn't polished. It was lived. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back?" He pulled a folded document from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. "Because I saw your name in an internal memo last month. Someone flagged your language corrections in a Beijing file. I knew you had inherited more than just Veronica's eyes." Vivian opened the paper. It was a photocopy of a contract draft, not one she had worked on. But the margin notes were in her own writing. Underlined phrases circled gaps, one annotation that read, "Implied liquidity, guaranteed transfer." She remembered writing that. "You listen like your mother did," Yishin said. "You read tone, not just content. That scares them." Vivian folded the paper again. "So, what you want me to expose them, finish what you and Mom couldn't?" "No," he said. "I want you to survive. But if you do choose to look deeper, don't follow people. Follow money. That's the only trail they can't clean with a press release." She studied him for a long time. "Do you have proof that they orchestrated the fall?" "Only fragments. They were good at erasing. But they left one crack, a trail they didn't mean to leave. It starts with something called Orion Holdings." Vivian recognized the name. She had seen it once in a closed project folder flagged as defunct. No additional information. "I can't just waltz into the server room," she said. "I didn't say you should. I just said to know where the shadow is, even if you're standing in the light." A long silence followed. Birds stirred overhead. The park began to hum with the slow arrival of morning life. Finally, Vivian spoke. "What happens if they know you talk to me?" He shrugged lightly. "Then I disappear again. But you're not alone. Not anymore." She stood slowly, the photo still in her pocket, the paper folded in her coat. She didn't know what she felt. Anger. Relief. Grief. For the idea of a father that had never been true. Maybe all of it. Yishen remained seated. He didn't try to hug her, didn't push. As she turned to leave, he said one last thing. "You're stronger than both of us. That's why they'll try harder to silence you." Vivian didn't look back, but the words stayed with her long after she crossed the park and disappeared into the city haze. If her mother had survived by vanishing and her father by hiding, then maybe she would survive by doing something. Neither had the chance to fighting back on her own terms. Behind her, the chess tables emptied. Yishen Mo stood up slowly, slid his hands back into his coat, and vanished down a quiet path without a sound. Vivian had grown used to the invisible weight, the kind that didn't press down on your shoulders all at once, but crept up day by day, like a slow tightening around your lungs. She arrived early every morning, earlier than she needed to, just to buy herself a few minutes of calm before the floor filled with clipped heels, tailored suits, and sideways glances. Her Mandarin translation work had expanded. She was now handling executive-level drafts and pre-negotiation summaries, sometimes even briefed directly by one of the VPs. Still, every success came wrapped in a kind of scrutiny that never seemed to settle. Her inbox would ping with questions she hadn't been copied on. Her edits were reviewed twice. Not once. Someone was watching. Not out of curiosity, but to confirm a suspicion. It was late Thursday when she first noticed the camera in the hallway, outside the archive room, blinking red. She had passed by it dozens of times. It had always been there. But the blinking was new. Not recording. Scanning. A red eye looking for patterns. Vivian stopped for half a second too long, then walked on. The next morning, Edric summoned her to his office. No email, no assistant. He met her in the hallway with a nod and opened the door himself. His office smelled faintly of old leather and fresh paper. The city sprawled outside the glass wall behind him. He gestured to a chair near a smaller side table, more casual than the conference desk. "I have a call with the Chengdu partners in 10. I want you to listen in. Interpret tone more than words." Vivian sat not stiffly but alert. Understood. The call connected. Two men appeared on screen speaking in polite Mandarin. Vivian jotted down phrases, quickly translating Edric's replies in her head before he even said them. The Chengdu team mentioned shifting guarantees in their supplier contracts phrased as a flexibility clause. Vivian leaned in slightly. "They're signaling delay," she murmured. "Not in production, in cash flow. They're asking for time." Edric tapped his pen against the table, then switched to Mandarin, answering with a comment about mutual patience and market cycles. One of the Chinese execs smiled faintly. Vivian saw it. Not a warm smile, a wary one. After the call ended, Edric closed his laptop and turned to her. "That was helpful," he said. She didn't smile. "They don't trust you yet, but they don't distrust you either." Neutral territory. For now. Edric studied her. "You don't hedge your words. I don't have that luxury." He nodded once slowly. Then he said, not quite changing the subject, "You've had dinner with your mother recently." Vivian blinked. "Why?" "Just wondering. My mother used to say when you're under pressure, home either becomes a refuge or another battlefield. Mine tends to be both." Something in his expression softened, a flicker brief as a breath. He straightened. "Good work today. Take the rest of the afternoon off." She stood confused. "Is that an order? A suggestion, before the floor starts eating its own?" Vivian left the office feeling unsettled. The compliment had been genuine, but something about the tone was off, as if Edric knew something she didn't, or was trying to offer a kindness that had consequences. Later that day, she took the stairs to the records department rather than the elevator. The long hallway was nearly empty. When she turned the corner, she stopped short. Donald Greaves stood at the end of the corridor, speaking in low tones to one of the IT staff. The man had a clipboard and a worried expression. Vivian turned back silently. She didn't need to be seen. On Monday, a formal-looking memo appeared in her inbox. Routine audit of internal document access, it claimed. All employees in sensitive roles to expect monitoring for security compliance. She clicked past the memo and noticed a new folder had been added to her shared drive, training material. But when she opened it, it was empty. A ghost folder. At lunch, she was surprised to receive an invitation from Victoria Lane. The email was brief. Would love to connect. 11:30. Rooftop lounge. Vivian considered deleting it, but ignoring a social cue in a place like Lewis was as loud as accepting it. She went. Victoria greeted her with a practiced smile and a glass of cucumber water already poured. It's beautiful up here, Victoria said, gesturing to the skyline, but you can only enjoy it if you forget the floors below. Vivian nodded politely. Edric mentioned you speak Mandarin. That's impressive. Did you study abroad? Community classes, Vivian said, and practice. Victoria's smile didn't move. Natural talent. You know, with all the AI tools out now, language feels less mysterious. I don't think software interprets intent. True, Victoria said, then leaned slightly forward. So what is your intent, Vivian? Vivian blinked. I'm sorry. You're clearly talented and visible and new. I just hope you know how this place works. Vivian put her glass down. I'm still learning. We all are, Victoria said sweetly, but her eyes stayed sharp. That same afternoon, Vivian passed Amira Thorne in the hallway. The woman paused and fell into step beside her. They send the tall blonde first, and if that doesn't work, they send me, Amira said lightly. Vivian gave her a sideways glance. Excuse me? You're in the audit trail now. Watch what you open. Vivian stopped. What are you talking about? Just some friendly advice. I'm technically your legal protection, but that only matters if you survive the onboarding. Amira walked off without another word. That night, Vivian stayed late to finish a translation set. As she printed her draft, she noticed something in the output tray that wasn't hers, a printed screenshot. It showed her login history, time-stamped, cross-referenced. One tab in the screenshot had a red flag next to it, Employee Anomaly. She turned slowly. No one else was in the room, but someone had left this for her to find. The next morning, Edric caught her in the break room. He handed her a file folder. I need your eyes on this tonight. Priority. She took it without asking, then paused. Who else is reviewing this? Just you. I need your read before the next round of signatures. Is this about Chengdu? Edric held her gaze. It's about who's listening, not who's talking. Vivian took the folder back to her desk, opened it, saw nothing unusual, until page 7. A company name. Orion Holdings. Her pulse quickened. She marked the page, closed the file. And as she did, she felt the click of something tightening around her. Not a trap, not yet, but a warning. Just before 5, a man passed her desk. African-American mid-50s security badge on his hip. He didn't stop. But under his breath, he said, They moved the cameras. Don't walk alone tonight. Vivian looked up. What's your name? He smiled without smiling. Alton, you don't know me, but I know you're not just passing through. Then he was gone. By the time she left the building, the lights in Donald Greaves' office were still on. So was the red light outside the archive room. Vivian tightened her coat and kept walking. Everyone was watching, but no one was really seeing. The building never truly slept. It dimmed, it quieted, it paused, but somewhere on every floor, a light stayed on. A door clicked shut, a printer hummed. Vivian stayed later each night, not by choice, but by calculation. She needed space. Space to think, to move, to breathe without every gesture being read or interpreted. When the last elevator chimed behind her and most of the tailored ghosts had filed out, she sat at her desk, eyes burning, reviewing line edits that now felt more like traps than tasks. That evening, as she logged out of her terminal, a sticky note was tucked discreetly under her mousepad. No name, just 3 words, Room B4. Midnight. She read it twice, her heart skipping the way it used to when she was 10. And her mother came home without speaking, face tight with held-back fire. She didn't go immediately. She took her time, changed into sneakers, walked a block, came back, checked to see if the note was still there. It wasn't. At 11:57, she walked down the basement stairwell, each echo of her steps a metronome of doubt. Room B4 was at the far end of the service corridor, half-lit part storage and part security hub. She pushed the door slowly. It wasn't locked. The air inside was cooler, tinged with metal and the faint whir of old machinery. In the far corner near a stack of unused monitors, a man leaned against a folding table, arms crossed. Alton Ray. You came, he said, not as a question, but a quiet nod of recognition. Vivian closed the door behind her. You left the note. I did. You've been watched. The kind of watched that don't come with a warning. Vivian exhaled slowly. I figured that part out. Alton picked up a flash drive from the table, held it in his palm. He didn't extend it yet. You remember the night shift at Hudson Grill? You were the only server who cleared your own tables and helped the dishwasher when they were down a man. Vivian blinked. She hadn't expected memory. Not here. Not now. You were the overnight delivery guy. The produce vendor. He nodded once. Been working at Lewis 6 years now. Most folks don't see me. I like it that way. Cameras don't ask questions unless someone tells them what to see. Vivian took a step closer. So what are you showing me? Alton placed the flash drive on the table. Footage from last week. Records room. After hours. Donald Greaves. Her pulse ticked higher. She reached for it. He stopped her. Don't take it. Watch it here. If you walk out of this room with evidence, you're not just a translator anymore. You become something else. Vivian hesitated, then sat. Alton booted the monitor plugged in the drive. A grainy feed appeared, time-stamped quiet. Donald entered the storage room, looked around, typed in a clearance code, and pulled 2 thick files from a locked drawer. Then he placed them into a new folder labeled Archived Redacted, his face calm, deliberate, like he'd done it before. He doesn't know this angle exists, Alton said. That camera's supposed to be dead. Why are you showing me this? Because your name is in one of those folders. I saw it. Veronica Jones. Vivian's throat tightened. My mother. They buried something. Not just records, reputations. Vivian leaned back, absorbing it all. The risk. The implication. Why not go to legal or Edric? Alton shook his head. Legal's bought. Edric's too careful. He plays chess. This requires a fire starter. I think that might be you. She didn't answer. Not immediately. Her thoughts moved fast and heavy. If I go forward with this, they'll come after me. They already are. The difference is, now you get to decide the direction. Alton unplugged the drive. You leave this here. I'll hide it again. You want it. You know where to find me. Vivian stood. The air felt heavier. She reached for the door. Alton. Yeah. Why help me? He didn't smile, but his voice held something close to warmth. Because you looked me in the eye when you were still wearing an apron. Most folks only learn how to see up, not across. Vivian walked back to her apartment that night, the city colder than she remembered. She sat on her couch till dawn, thoughts layered and sharp. They hadn't just erased her mother's legacy. They'd made sure no one could ever verify it existed. But that camera had caught more than a theft. It caught an intention, one deliberate enough to destroy whoever questioned it. The next morning, she returned to her desk to find a post-it in a new handwriting. It simply read, "Meeting in 5. Bring your questions." No signature. She tucked it into her pocket, stood up, and walked forward. Alton had shown her the door. Now she had to decide if she would walk through it. The night Vivian left room B4, she didn't go home. She walked 5 city blocks, past closed bakeries, shuttered law offices, and buses humming with nobody inside. The city no longer offered her noise to hide behind. Every footstep echoed too clearly. She stopped at the end of Crescent Avenue and stared across the street at West Point Memorial. Inside, her mother lay in a second-floor room hooked to machines that beeped not out of panic, but out of persistence. Chronic pulmonary fibrosis had carved up Veronica's lungs for the last 2 years. It started slow, a cough, then fatigue, then breathlessness climbing stairs. Now she couldn't walk across the room without her oxygen tank, and the new trial medication, recently approved and wildly expensive, had offered hope. A brief one. Veronica wasn't dying fast. She was dying slow, and the waiting was the cruelest part. Vivian walked in quietly, the night nurse nodding at her with sleepy recognition. Her mother lay tilted slightly to her left side, breathing thin and even. Her eyes were closed, but her hand moved slightly when Vivian touched it. "You need to rest," Vivian whispered. "You need to run," Veronica whispered back without opening her eyes. Vivian sat. No more questions tonight. She watched the shadows crawl across the tiled walls until the lights dimmed on their own. The next morning, she returned to Lewis Global with something heavy lodged behind her ribs. She wasn't late, but she was slower. When she reached her desk, there was a small white envelope. Inside, an unsigned note written in fine cursive. "Conference room 9, 12 sharp, bring no one. H*****. She read it 3 times, then folded it into her notebook. At noon, she walked the long hallway to the top floor, where conference room 9 overlooked the city like a quiet cathedral of glass. Inside, a man she'd never officially met stood by the window, Winston Holmes, Senior Director of Client Strategy, tidy suit, silver tie, controlled smile. "Miss Jones," he said smoothly, not turning to face her yet. "You've been doing exceptional work. Everyone notices." Vivian didn't sit. "Did you ask me here to flatter me, Mr. Holmes?" He turned now, holding a file in his left hand. Her name was typed cleanly on the label. "No," he said. "I asked you here because I think you understand pressure. And people who understand pressure don't waste time pretending there aren't choices to be made." Vivian didn't answer. Holmes placed the file gently on the table. "Your mother's treatment is extraordinary, the kind of care that isn't covered by traditional insurance, but you know that. We all do our research." Vivian's jaw tightened. "Is this a threat?" "No," he said. "It's a door. You can choose not to open it, but if you do, you'll find that helping me even subtly can ensure your mother receives exactly what she needs when she needs it. No red tape, no waiting lists." "And what do you want in return?" "Small things, internal forecasts, contract revision drafts, things that seem meaningless on their own. They paint pictures when combined." Vivian stepped back. Holmes' voice never rose. It never needed to. He spoke like a man who had never heard no said out loud. "You don't need to decide now," he said, nodding once. "But the offer doesn't stay open forever. You understand that." She walked out without another word. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The corridors looked longer than they had before. She returned to her desk to find another message. This one short. One word. "Park. Asterisk, asterisk." She knew who it was. She arrived 30 minutes later, coat barely shielding her from the wind that scraped across the park benches. Yushen Mo sat near the far fountain. He looked thinner, sharper. "You have the eyes of someone who's been offered a compromise," he said. Vivian sat next to him. "What do you know about Winston Holmes?" "Enough to know you shouldn't accept his kindness." She pulled her coat tighter. "What do you want from me?" "There's a server backup, private, off-network, holds original audits tied to Veronica's case. If you access it, it could make clear what happened. It might also implicate several people, including Edric." Vivian turned sharply. "Edric! He wasn't in power then, but his name is on some approvals. Whether he knew or not, I can't say. And if I don't help you, then no one helps her," Yushin said softly. "And I disappear again. You won't hear from me a third time." Vivian left without shaking his hand. Her thoughts knotted tighter with every step. That night, Edric called her into his office. He didn't sit. "You've been distracted," he said. "I don't need to know why. But I need to know if I can trust you." Vivian looked at him fully. "Why did you hire me, really?" "Because you don't flinch, and you don't lie. At least not easily." "That's not an answer." "It's the best one I can give right now." Silence settled between them. Edric nodded once. "You'll need to make some hard calls soon. I hope you remember who you are when you do." That night, Vivian sat on the floor of her apartment laptop, open hands trembling. She accessed the internal drive, edited 3-line items in a contract summary slated for board review. Minor language shifts, but enough to flag a warning in Holmes's system. Then she saved the original version encrypted and emailed it to a dead drop she created under a pseudonym. The next day, Holmes passed her in the hall and nodded once. Nothing more. Vivian knew this was the beginning of something irreversible, but she didn't know yet what it would cost. Only that every option had a price, and she had just started to pay hers. The fallout started on a Tuesday. Vivian knew something was wrong the moment she stepped out of the elevator. The silence on the 22nd floor was too perfect, like a stage before the curtains rose. Desks that were usually cluttered with work sat spotless. Screens dimmed. Eyes shifted, not meeting hers directly, but brushing past like a wind that knew her name but wouldn't speak it aloud. Her badge beeped a little slower at the security gate. Nothing definitive, but enough to make her heartbeat stumble. At her desk, her screen was already unlocked. A post-it note rested against her keyboard. Conference Room 6. Now. No initials, no hint. Just an order unsigned, but unmistakably meant. Vivian walked the long hall, slowly passing portraits of former CEOs whose smiles hadn't aged well. When she entered Room 6, the air hit colder than expected. Donald Greaves stood alone near the head of the table. He didn't greet her. Instead, he gestured toward the corner where a monitor sat idle. He tapped a key. A video played. It showed her sitting at a cafe. A man slid into the chair across from her. Vivian recognized the moment it was after a translation meeting 3 weeks ago. The man had asked directions in Mandarin. She offered help. Now edited footage made it look like a covert handoff. A folder passed. A moment cut. Her hands tense. His eyes scanning. Donald paused the clip, turned. You want to tell me what that was? Vivian's breath came shallow. He was lost. I gave directions. That's not even... It's being reviewed. Internally. By who? Donald raised an eyebrow. People above both of us. I suggest you stay available. But quiet. She left the room with her fists clenched so tightly her nails left crescent moons in her palms. By the time she returned to her desk, Alton Ray was already standing nearby. He looked shaken. They checked the logs, he whispered. Someone flagged a discrepancy in the camera archive. My shift. They think I trimmed footage. Vivian's throat dried. Did you? I protected you. An hour later, Alton was gone. No security escort. No scene. Just a quiet disappearance. His name vanished from the system that same afternoon. Vivian sat at her desk, staring at the empty chair for 15 full minutes before noticing the envelope under her keyboard. It was plain unmarked except for a small triangle drawn in the corner, inside a USB. Nothing else. She waited until midnight to open it back home. Lights dimmed, blinds closed. The file was short, a 10-minute silent clip from an overhead angle inside the finance sub-office. Donald, late night, alone, opening a locked cabinet, removing a file labeled V. Jones, scanning pages, smiling. She watched it twice, then encrypted a copy and saved it in 2 separate drives. The next morning, she found herself across from Edric Lewis at the Atrium coffee stand. His usual stiffness was gone. He didn't ask her to sit, just handed over a drink without comment. You think I did it, she said. He looked past her toward the tall windows. I think this place has 1,000 secrets, and some of them like to wear your face when they go hunting. That's not a no. Edric finally turned. If I thought you were a threat, you wouldn't be standing here. She nodded slowly, unsure if that was protection or a warning. Either way, she walked away, holding her drink like a fragile contract. That night, her phone buzzed with a number she hadn't saved. A meeting request. Same rooftop bar where she'd once seen Victoria laughing too loudly. Vivian went, not because she wanted to, but because not going meant surrender. Amira Thorne sat in the corner back to the windcoat pristine. She didn't smile. They're building a case against you, she said simply. You're late, I know, but I didn't have proof until now. Vivian sat. Amira opened a slim leather folder. Inside printouts, transaction trails, meeting minutes, encrypted emails. She tapped one. Victoria Lane created a Shell subsidiary last year, offshore. It's been used to reroute funds from a Hong Kong project into a Cayman holding. Looks clean until you dig into the date stamps. Why are you giving me this? Amira looked down. Her voice softened. Because I used to believe in these people, and I watched them ruin people like you because it was easy, because it didn't cost them anything. Vivian held her gaze. What about Edric? Amira shook her head. He doesn't know, or at least not this part. But if this goes up, it takes his last name with it. Vivian exhaled slowly. So what now? Now you build your case, and I'll help. But be smart. Victoria will not go down without setting fire to everything around her. Vivian reached for the folder, hands steady now. Let her burn, just not me. The walls of power never fall all at once. They tremble first. It started with a text message from Theo Lewis. No emojis, no fluff, just coordinates to a storage unit and a 4-digit passcode. Vivian stared at the screen for nearly a full minute before locking her apartment door and heading out. The rain that night was cold and clean, a rare kind of weather in a city too busy to feel anything real. The unit was silent, sterile, and dry. Inside were 3 crates neatly labeled and sealed. Financial records company correspondences and legal memos documents Theo had quietly copied over months. He was never part of the Lewis leadership machine. He was Edric's younger brother, yes, but he had always preferred staying out of boardrooms, working as a mid-level analyst on projects with real-world impact. But even from that level, he'd seen things, and he had reached his limit. When Vivian arrived at the appointed time the next morning, Theo was already seated in the back of the office cafeteria, eyes puffy, face pale. He looked like someone who had read too many truths too fast. I didn't want to be involved, he said before she even sat down. But when I saw them coming after you and I saw the records of how they came after Mom, I couldn't be the guy who just watched. Vivian nodded once. You did the right thing. But we have to be careful. Amira joined them 15 minutes later holding a thumb drive like it was glass. I cleaned up the trail, she said, and I got access to Victoria's offshore transactions. She slipped, probably thought no one was looking. The trio reviewed everything for hours, cross-referenced names, matched invoice chains, tied travel records to private meetings and investment transfers. Vivian didn't eat. Her mind was too sharp now, cut by a month of fear and sharpened by a lifetime of restraint. She wasn't running anymore. By early afternoon, Amira looked up. "We have enough for an indictment or a press conference." Vivian replied without blinking. Both. They needed Edric. They didn't trust him completely, but they needed the platform he still controlled. Amira arranged the meeting. Theo insisted it happen in a public place, not a cafe, not an office, but a neutral conference room at the university, where Theo sometimes guest lectured. It was brightly lit, surrounded by glass. No secrets in that room. Edric arrived tense but composed. He didn't sit. He simply looked at the three of them, then at the folder Amira pushed across the table. "What is this?" Theo answered. "Everything. About Donald, about Victoria, about the shell firms and the money they hid behind your last name." Edric didn't open the folder right away. "Why bring it to me?" Vivian stepped forward. "Because you still have a voice in this company, because you might actually care about the name you inherited, and because you told me once that truth mattered more than legacy. We're calling you on that." Edric opened the folder. Silence. Long. Unforgiving. Then finally he looked up. "If we do this, it won't be quiet." "Good," Vivian said. "Let it be loud." Within 48 hours, Edric scheduled a press briefing. No leaks, no rumors, just an internal memo announcing a strategic financial update. But everyone at Lewis Global knew something was coming. The air felt electric. The room was full when the press arrived. Shareholders, mid-level managers, a few employees who had survived the last downsizing. The media vans parked outside the building like vultures sensing death. Edric stood at the podium. His suit was crisp. His voice was clear. But there was a tremor in his fingers he couldn't fully hide. "We're here today to speak truthfully, not about quarterly gains, not about growth trajectories, but about the values we claim to uphold, and the people we failed." Gasps. Murmurs. Reporters leaned forward. He continued, "Evidence has been brought to my attention involving financial misconduct, breaches of trust, and deliberate attempts to silence individuals inside this organization. These actions were led by Donald Greaves and Victoria Lane." The camera lights flared. Phones buzzed. Donald was not in the room. Vivian stood behind the curtain with Amira. She held her breath. Edric went on. "Effective immediately, Donald Greaves is suspended and under investigation. Federal authorities have been contacted. A full internal audit will begin this week. Victoria Lane has been removed from all decision-making roles pending legal review." Two officers appeared at the back of the room. Donald, having arrived late, barely had time to step into the lobby before he was approached, spoken to quietly, and escorted away in cuffs. At the same hour across the city, Holmes was handcuffed outside his hospital room. An orderly had tipped off the authorities after recognizing his name from the press release. The charges read extortion, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to defraud. By the time Vivian left the building, the sun had dipped behind the skyline. She walked without speaking, Amira by her side. Theo had stayed behind to answer questions from press associates. Edric was surrounded by board members whose faces had aged 5 years in 1 hour. Outside, the air smelled of rain again. Amira turned to her. "You should be proud." Vivian shook her head. "I'm not done." Amira looked down. "Then I'll walk with you a little longer." They didn't speak again, but they didn't need to. Inside, Edric stood alone in the now empty press room. He looked at the microphones, at the spot where his father had once stood to announce the acquisition of the Pacific banks. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he made one final call. To the board, he submitted his resignation, not in shame, but in principle. No one, he wrote, has the right to stand above truth simply because they bear the Lewis name. The company would survive, but it would never be the same. And that was the point. It had only been 4 weeks since the press conference, but everything felt different. The executive offices at Lewis Global no longer smelled of power. There were no bouquets sent in from politicians, no phone calls looping through assistant chains, and the security desk had stopped demanding badges from people they used to ignore. The boardroom, once thick with controlled chaos, now echoed with a quiet that no one knew how to fill. Vivian had not been back in the building since the day Edric stepped down. She had no intention to return. But when the invitation arrived in a letterhead envelope typed clean and folded twice, something in her stomach shifted. The board had asked her to consider a new role, public ethics advisor, a seat created specifically to show their commitment to reform, and with it, a symbolic gesture that the old order could change. She read the letter twice, then slid it into her desk drawer. The fact that it was unsigned told her all she needed to know. No names, no voices, just a gesture for optics, nothing more. Her phone buzzed later that afternoon. Alton Ray. His voice, even over the phone, carried weight without pretense. "They offered me my job back," he said. "I told them I'd think about it." Vivian smiled faintly. "You gonna say yes?" "Not unless I can investigate them." Vivian laughed, the first real laugh in weeks. "You always wanted to be a quiet storm. Maybe it's time I stop being quiet." By the end of the week, Alton had accepted a new role, Director of Internal Oversight. It came with no press, no announcement, but within days, 2 senior managers were let go for harassment complaints that had been buried for years. Vivian, meanwhile, turned down the board's offer. She had no interest in being anyone's shield or symbol. Instead, she filed paperwork to create something new, the Veronica Foundation, named not in pity or penance, but in truth. A fund for women of color pursuing careers in finance, ethics, and investigative accounting. The foundation's mission was simple transparency through education and access. No hidden strings. She used her own savings. Then Theo added his inheritance, and Amira reached out to former clients and legal partners securing matching donations. The foundation opened in a modest office on West Cedar across from a quiet coffee shop and above a nail salon run by a Cambodian woman who, upon hearing Vivian's plan, offered the space at half the usual rent. The first applicants arrived quietly, most of them unsure if they belonged. One girl, aged 19, brought her mother. Another, only 17, whispered her essay because she was embarrassed to read in public. But each had a story. Each had a name worth remembering. Amira started leading weekend workshops on financial law. Theo taught beginner investment classes. Vivian, though exhausted, stayed until the last chair was stacked each night. The work felt heavy but honest. One evening, after a long day of reviewing applications, Vivian stood by the window and watched the street below. She saw women walk with their heads held higher than before. She saw a few men step aside, make space. Not because they were told, but because the world maybe had shifted. That night, she visited her mother. The hospital wing was quieter now. Her mother's condition had stabilized, though her speech remained soft and her memory sometimes slow. Vivian sat by the bedside, holding her mother's hand. "They offered me something," Vivian said. Her mother blinked slowly. "Money. A job. A title." Her mother's smile barely moved her lips. "You didn't take it." "No." Veronica looked at her daughter. Her voice, though thin, carried clarity. "Good." Vivian leaned in. "Why didn't you fight back all those years ago?" Veronica turned her head slightly toward the ceiling. "Because they made me believe no one would listen. And because I was tired." Vivian nodded. "You don't have to be tired anymore. I'll carry it now." The next morning, she returned to the foundation office to find a note slipped under the door. Handwritten. No signature. It read, "She would be proud. Keep going." Vivian folded it twice and placed it in her wallet. Across town, Edric sat in a modest apartment with mismatched chairs and peeling paint. He taught evening finance classes at a community college where half the students worked full-time jobs and carried toddlers into night classes. He never used the name Lewis. On the door of the mailbox, the paycheck stub, it simply read Edric L. Every once in a while, he would open the local paper hoping not to see his name, but hers. When he did, when he read about the foundation or about a new scholarship in Veronica's name, he would smile. Not wide, not smug, but real. One Tuesday, he got a call from Alton. No greeting, just "You were right," about the risk, about the cost, but also about the worth. Edric leaned back in his chair. "You think we bought enough time for her to change things?" No, Alton replied, "But I think she's building a door where there never was one." The conversation ended. Neither needed to say more. Back at the foundation, Vivian pinned a photo on the wall. Her mother at 27 standing outside Lewis Global holding a company badge. In the picture, Veronica's smile was full, her eyes unbroken. Below it, a simple plaque. She did not ask to be honored, only to be believed. Vivian stood quietly for a moment, then turned toward the next applicant waiting to be interviewed, a girl no older than she had been when it all started. "Come in," she said. "Tell me your story." 1 year later, the city moved differently for Vivian. The glass towers still shimmered with their detached confidence, and the streets still pulsed with ambition, but she had stepped outside the rhythm. She wasn't trying to match their pace anymore. Her world had shifted from survival to significance. That morning, she stood on a small hill in Lincoln Memorial Cemetery, hands gently resting on her round belly, a breeze catching the hem of her long gray coat. It was early spring, the kind of day where everything feels soft and new, but still remembers winter. The stone in front of her was smooth, understated, but deliberate. Engraved into the granite were words chosen not to forgive, but to honor. She was never forgiven because she was never guilty. Beneath it, Veronica D. Jones, mother, accountant, fighter. The final period had been placed. Vivian didn't speak. She didn't have to. She just stood there breathing in silence. The baby moved once a slow press beneath her ribs as if acknowledging the moment too. She closed her eyes. She remembered her mother's final weeks, how the hospital lights turned everything yellow, how the machines kept score of time in pulses and hums. Veronica had gone peacefully, but not quietly. Her voice had returned in brief cutting through fog to say things that Vivian still heard every morning. Like, don't let anyone measure your worth in what you lose, and silence isn't dignity if it's forced. On the day she passed, Vivian had been holding her hand, whispering the numbers of their old apartment on Claiborne Street, 104-2, again and again, as if anchoring her back to something solid. But in the end, Veronica had chosen release. From the cemetery, Vivian drove 2 hours out of the city to a small college campus tucked into the hills where old brick buildings met newer glass ones, like hands reaching across time. The economics department wasn't large, but it buzzed with energy. A modest lecture room was in session. Edric Lewis stood at the board sleeves, rolled up his hair slightly longer, now his beard trimmed, but graying at the edge. His voice was softer than it used to be, but clearer, more grounded. He pointed to a chart, nothing flashy, just trends over time, cycles of wealth pressure points, and the students were locked in, not by charisma, but by clarity. By the rare experience of being taught by someone who had walked through fire and come out without the suit. After the session ended, Vivian waited at the end of the corridor. Edric saw her before she spoke, his steps slowing naturally. There was no rush. They met halfway. He looked at her belly first, a quiet warmth flickering in his eyes, then back at her face. "Hey," he said. Vivian smiled not too wide. "Hey yourself." They sat on a bench just outside the building, the wind carrying faint hints of chalk dust and young ambition. She told him about the Veronica Foundation's first scholarship recipient, a Haitian-American girl majoring in accounting and Mandarin. He told her about one of his students who built a non-profit with a budget so tight he taught himself to code from a library book. They didn't talk about the past, not out of avoidance, but because it no longer led the conversation. "You okay?" Edric asked, eyes softening just enough. "I think so," Vivian said, rubbing her stomach once. "I'm not scared. Not the way I thought I'd be." He nodded, his breath slow. "It's a good place to start." They sat quietly a little longer. Then Vivian reached into her coat pocket and handed him a small envelope. Inside was a photo, black and white grainy, from an old Polaroid. It showed Veronica in a messy bun holding a baby who looked stubborn even then. Behind them stood Yishen Mo, a rare smile on his face. Edric looked at it, turned it over, then looked again. "You keep it," he said finally. Vivian shook her head. "I've got more now." Before she left, he walked her to her car. No promises were made, no declarations. But as she drove off, Edric stood in the lot a while longer, hands in his pockets watching until the red taillights disappeared into the afternoon sun. Later that day, Vivian returned to the foundation office where Alton Ray was adjusting a printer tray and muttering something about outdated tech. He straightened when he saw her, offered the same nod he always did, half formal, half protective. "Board meeting at 3, he said. "And the audit review?" "Already done. We're clean." She looked at him, gratitude unspoken. "You ever think we'd be here?" Alton smirked. "I thought I'd be sweeping floors until I was 80. So no, ma'am, I did not." As the afternoon light poured into the glass panels of the foundation, Vivian stood before a wall of framed photos, each face a recipient, a voice, a story rebuilt. She touched the edge of one frame gently. Her mother's story had not ended in that hospital. It had uncoiled into others. And now this child, this life growing inside her, would enter a world where truth had been reclaimed, not by power, but by persistence. And that made all the difference. She whispered to the room, not for anyone to hear but herself, "We owe nothing to the past, except the courage to be better." Then she stepped forward, ready. "Thank you for walking with us to the very end of this long and winding story. If you're still here, it means something in this journey stirred something in you, maybe a memory. Maybe a quiet anger, maybe hope. Whatever it was, it mattered. We hope these characters gave voice to things that often go unsaid: dignity, injustice healing, and the quiet courage it takes to break a cycle. If a moment in this story moved you, let us know. Tell us what stayed with you. And while you're here, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Wherever you are, know that we are grateful for your time, your heart, and your attention. We'll see you again soon in the next story. Until then, stay true, stay kind, and stay awake.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.